The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Want to shake up your small business marketing? I mean, really shake it up.
Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
Have you been thinking about doing your own podcast?
Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
Would you like to take your business to the next level?
Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
This is the golden age of podcasting, and it's time to stop thinking and start doing.
Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
Get your message heard 24/7, 365, over and over again.
Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Welcome to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
Here's the creator and host of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, David Garofalo.
Welcome, everybody, to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is a 21-minute or less weekly podcast to help you get your message out, grow your business, and build your bottom line. Let me help you bring your marketing and advertising into the 21st century. My name is David Garofalo. I've been doing podcasting since 2010, and I've created a six-figure income from doing my podcast alone. This is a 21-minute podcast or less, so let's start the clock, and here we go. Today's topic will be segment and selling on your podcast. Creating segments for your show and building them around advertisers and sponsors. A segment on a podcast is dividing the podcast into different pieces. Each piece or segment of the show should be laid out to control the show's flow. It is in its simplest form, a show has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is the introduction of the show and the warming up of the topic, the broadcasters, or the subject matter. The middle is the meat of the show, the overall content, the storytelling, interviewing, the information in the middle. And the end is the conclusion or the wrap-up, the finish of the show. This is what every podcast must have at an absolute minimum for each show, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Wouldn't it be weird if the show just ended? No, this is just the beginning. I'm easing into the content. I introduced myself and started telling you what I'm going to tell you. And now getting to the meat of the show. So here it goes. If you want to go to the next level of your podcast, you will want to have lots of segments. It will make the show better. The flow will be much better, including the segments of the show, segmenting your show. Your listeners will be waiting for the next segment or their favorite segment of the show. One question today is, should you put segments on your show? And the easy answer is probably yes, depending on your show, but probably yes. Segments on your show is critical to help you stay on track to doing your podcast. Saying it's time for this segment makes for an easy transition into the next segment. Here's another reason why the answer is probably yes. You might be able to create some income, money, from the segment. It's called segment selling. I'm sure you've heard it. It's on every sports broadcast. This segment brought to you by, insert the company's name here. You may have dozens of segments on any ball game that you listen to. First off, the ballpark itself is a segment. It's branded, which is a form of segments. The New England Patriots live from Gillette Stadium. It used to be Foxborough Stadium, the city where the stadium is. And before that, it was Sullivan Stadium from the Sullivan family who owned the stadium. And then a smart businessman took over and renamed it Gillette Stadium. The Gillette Stadium naming rights cost Procter & Gamble $8 million a year over a 15-year contract. $8 million over 15 years. That's $120 million. And that's not even close to the most. Citigroup global banking leader, paid $400 million over 20 years to name a stadium which the New York Mets play in. And they haven't even won a World Series in over 30 years. But it's business. It's $400 million in business. In this case, we have a branded studio. So this podcast and every program on the United Podcast Network is live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. You hear it a lot during this show because this is a podcast about Studio 21 called Studio 21. It's a podcast studio and it's a cafe where we serve coffee. We own the show and we say it over and over again, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. If and when I get a sponsor to pay for it, by the way, at a much lower price, if you're interested, than the Mets or the Patriots, and if you're interested, give me a call. We might rebrand it if somebody's willing to attach their name to it and pay us for it. On my The Cigar Authority podcast, live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, it takes place on the La Flor Dominicana sound stage. Coincidentally, it's the same stage we have right here, but we branded it. We add their ashtray, their logos on the monitor, and I'm done. And we mention it at the beginning and after coming back from the commercial break. This mention is a commercial in itself. It's a branded commercial which gets their name out over and over again. It's great branding, getting your message out over and over again. We all know that the success of advertising is repetition. Over and over again. Lots of mentions, over and over again. And now back to the game. The pregame show is brought to you by Dunkin' Donuts. The postgame show is brought to you by Midas Muffler. During the game, look around. Everything has a corporate sponsor. Now look at your podcast. Take a good look and a good listen. Are you leaving something on the table? There's no doubt you are. Finding the right sponsor for the right segment is very important, though. Or creating the right segment for the advertiser, which is the win-win of all. This is what you want to accomplish. A successful advertiser where they accomplish what they are trying to get out of their advertising dollars. You want a sponsor that is successful from your ads. You want them to stay on for a long time, so they need success, while creating a segment that is entertaining and helpful for your listener. So while you're doing this, this is something that you want to entertain your listener to, that segment. This is important for long-term success for both you and the advertiser. The advertiser will stay on if this is successful for them. So what will work? We're going to look at what might work for you in just 1 minute. But first, listen to this.
If you're in the area of Boston North into southern New Hampshire and you're thinking about doing a podcast, there is a place you have to see. It's called Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Located right over the border into Salem, New Hampshire, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a live, working, full-service podcast and vodcast, that's video on demand, studio. All professional equipment, professional producer, and total distribution of your podcast is done for you. Would you like search engine optimization for more people to find your business or better ranking on Google? Well, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe can do it all for you for far less than you think. Schedule a free 21-minute no-obligation consultation by going to www.studio21podcast.cafe. That's studio21podcast.cafe. Now, back to the program.
And we are back. And today we're talking about segments and selling segments on your podcast. Saying it's time for this segment makes for an easy transition. It will make for a better show. It's easier for you, and it keeps you on track to your show. These are the bullet points. You're going to the next segment, brought to you by. Segments are also great for creating income. It's called segment selling. In order to pull it off, you need to have a segment that is perfect for the sponsor. If you have to make a segment about times in the past or the future or anything time related. How about a watch company or a jeweler who specializes in watches or clocks? Maybe that would work. I need you to start thinking this way. How about a segment on your podcast that might be asking your listener to wake up? It's time to wake up. You could find a sponsor like a coffee brand or maybe even a coffee shop that would be the right sponsor for that. It's time to wake up, America. In the Wake Up America segment, sponsored by Mary Ann's Coffee Shop. Artisan coffee served by happy and friendly people and a great wake me up. Try Mary Ann's Coffee today. That's how something like that could go. You could do it another way around it too. Find the sponsor you think you can get and then create the perfect segment around them. How about a segment if a bakery, say, wanted to do business with you? Or you knew a bakery and you think you could get them. How about creating this sponsorship for Barry's Bakery? You could be talking about money, dough, right? There's the connection. If you're a financial segment in the show brought to you by Barry's Bakery, serving up the best dough in the business. Rolls, loaves, and pizza dough are their specialties. Find them at 123 Main Street in any town. That's how it could go. Or the happiest story of the week, brought to you by Barry's Bakery. Barry's Bakery, serving the most delicious pastry that always makes me happy. Find Barry's Bakery at 123 Main Street, my town. Now, here's the happiest story I heard all week. There's a segment. You need to get creative and come up with some segment ideas that could be perfect for the company to sponsor it. Or the perfect segment put together for just the right potential advertiser. This is a segment made just for them, a segment on every one of your shows that will have them mentioned, not in a commercial, but a mention with a tagline. No fast forward and past that. This is gold right here. This is advertising within the show, and nobody will fast forward past that. If you want, you can tag along a short and sweet message along with it like I did. The Back in Time segment brought to you by Main Street Jewelers, specializing in new and used Rolex watches. Get a fair price and a great watch. Find them at 123 Main Street in any town or online at msjewelers.com. And there it is. There's their segment, and then you go on to the Best in Time, whatever you're talking about. This could also work on a segment where you are watching out for trends in your industry. Watching out. Watches, right? You got to get creative. If a segment is planned correctly for the advertiser, there is an 87% better chance you will sell them on the idea than just asking them to advertise. It is made specifically for them. It connects. They'll be interested. Segments are also great for advertising in another way. They are really part of the podcast and will be looked upon and not be looked upon as just another advertiser. They are crucial and critical part of the program. But be warned, someday that advertiser may pull out and that segment will be left blank. So you need to get creative also. You need to have a backup plan of how to change it if that would happen. Who would be the right person for that? So selling a segment on your podcast is a win-win for you and your listeners, and more importantly, for the sponsor, the advertiser. The win-win-win, which is what you want. Add it to your podcast and reap the benefits all the way around. Make it a win-win-win. If you want to talk to me about this or about podcasting, simply email me at the Contact Us button at the Studio21podcast.cafe. I'll set up a meeting with me, and let me show you the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, and I'll even buy you a cup of coffee. Hey, while you're at it, go to the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. Check it out. Check out some of the segments of the podcasters that are doing podcasts on there, and they're doing them all from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. You'll hear that in there. Give them a listen, and please subscribe. This segment was brought to you by the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. The United Podcast Network is a place to find all kinds of entertaining and informative podcasts and vodcasts. That's video-on-demand podcasts. Find them at www.unitedpodcastnetwork.tv. That's it for me. Next week. My mother always told me to share when I was a kid. I did, and I still do. I'm sharing information with you right now. I shared information with all my podcasters, and I asked them to share not only the information, but my show. Sharing can make your podcast go viral and take off, way past where you thought it would go. Sharing, next time on the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. That's my 21 minutes or less, and we are out of here. You've been listening to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe on the United Podcast Network.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.